I was raised in a Mormon fundamentalist polygamist cult in Mexico. I am the fourth of my father's 58 children, and I'm also the first and the oldest, well, I should say the oldest living of my mother's 14 children. My mother had 14 of my father's 58 children. When I was born, my father already had 3 wives living in the same house. One of them, which was his first wife, was my aunt, and so I knew no different. This is what it was like. I had a dad that, for the most part of my life, was not around much, so that left a lot of responsibility to the women who had the, responsibility of not only raising us, but also indoctrinating us into what they thought was the truth. And part of that truth was that we needed to grow up and be polygamous. I guess being the oldest of my mother's children, I saw the suffering, the loneliness, all of her unmet needs, and I think that alone gave me a lot of strength. We were raised in poverty compared to what people live out here. My dad would bring home loads of hand-me-downs, so it wasn't like we could go to the store and experience new shoes, new dresses, things like that, and ate very just simple. We didn't have a lot of meat in our diet. We occasionally had chicken here or there that we actually had to go out and kill ourselves and clean.
Sure.
Well, actually, conveniences and running water, up until I was 18, for all of my life, most of it, I would say 80% of my life, we lived without electricity, running water, plumbing. We drew water from a well. A lot of hardship was put on us because of that, because we would have to sometimes wash our clothes by hand on scrub boards. My father did try to keep an old Maytag around, or a Maytag with an old washer, wringer type thing. But with that many children, it was a burden every day. There was just loads of laundry. It was a lot of responsibility put on me at a very, very young age. And that made me have to grow up. I felt at times that I was the mother, and didn't get to go out and play with my friends a lot, or just play house or dolls. I was always dealing with real babies, real diapers, and it was a lot of responsibility that was placed on my shoulders at a very, very young age. And I remember just weeping, literally weeping, when probably the last 4 pregnancies my mother told me about, because not only was she in very, very bad health, it meant more responsibility for me. I was born, and then I had 4 brothers in a row, so I was her right arm. Everything fell on me, and I just remember just thinking, what kind of God would require this of a person, to just keep giving birth after birth, and regardless of the health that she was in. It didn't matter that she had varicose veins. It didn't matter that, they never ever thought about, can we afford this child? It was just a requirement to populate this earth and the hereafter. I was taught my whole life that we were having children so that we could populate the next world, and I don't know, it was distressing to me. I graduated from 6th grade, and I remember that we went to get registered to go into high school, me and my other 2 sisters from my dad's first wife. We were all graduated at the same time, and my father got cold feet and decided that no, we needed to stay home and help our moms, especially me, that I needed to stay home and just help Mom raise the kids. He was also had the fear that we lived in Mexico, that if we went to the high schools, that we might, start longing or falling in love with somebody and leave our church and our beliefs. It was tough. We did move around a lot, but when I was born, we were born onto cold cement floors. There wasn't heating, there wasn't electricity. I remember as a child having to go out and draw water, literally with buckets, metal buckets from the well. Sometimes I think, wow, how did our parents even not worry that we were going to fall down and drown, because some of those wells were open. I remember moving from Chihuahua up to a place in the mountains where we spent 2 years living amongst the natives, and most of these people just lived on tortillas and beans and rice, and lived literally on dirt floors. And at one point in our life, I remember when we moved up there, we lived in a little 3-bedroom, humble home. One of the rooms had a wooden floor. I'm talking just planks of wood, no shellac or anything on it, just wood. And the other one was a dirt floor that we would literally have to sprinkle down to be able to sweep it so there wouldn't be dust everywhere. And then the other one was a cold cement floor. But it was, like I said, no conveniences. We used a potty our whole life, a 5-gallon bucket when there became so many of us. We'd have to use that at night to go potty in, and then we would have to dump it every day in an old outhouse. And there were so many times in my life we didn't even have toilet paper. That was a luxury. I remember my mother taking old clothes that my father would bring from the States, and after she would cut up the old clothes to make little pants and little shirts and little dresses for my siblings, she would use all of the remnants from the old coats and cut them up into small pieces and put them in like a cardboard box out in the outhouse so that we would use that as tissue. But I do remember, even, it's crazy, it's embarrassing to say, but I remember my mom and people taking all of our old notepads from school or our tablets, and once they were not useful, they would tear them up and, use sheets of paper to wipe our butt. So it was bad. We would bathe the kids in metal tubs. We'd have to literally heat buckets of water up on our stove, and then we would try to start with the cleanest kid in the house. But by the end of the day, living on dirt floors and in Mexico where there wasn't paved roads, it was muddy, dirty. My mom would just take a big cup of the warm water after she'd sudsed everybody down and give them their final large cup of rinse, and rinse their hair and rinse their little bodies off, and then we would, put them in a towel, get them dressed, put the next kid in. The poor kid at the end was pretty much in a mud bath, but he got rinsed off, I'd have to say, and felt clean and loved. We had a lot of fleas growing up, so it was, our sheets were covered with little blood stains all over from us getting eaten by fleas at night. We would wake up with flea bites all over the place. Everybody pretty much depended on the great physician, the Lord, to take care of them. They didn't believe in going to hospitals. They felt that God was enough. I saw their concern going in to give birth in our homes. And as a child, I remember being on the outside of the door and just hearing the agonizing whimpering and pain of trying to push out a baby, and agonizing with no medication whatsoever. I remember watching my mom prepare for the birth by heating up water on the stove and just putting Lysol and disinfectant out. And I also remember her taking like old string, like the string that they would save out of the flour sacks that we would fire flour in. There was this string that if you just pulled it out, it would unravel. And she would save that and wash it, and then she would take several strands, 2 or 3 or 4, I don't know, and braid it together, and then disinfect that in alcohol or whatever, and that's what she would prepare and use to tie the cord of the baby when it was born. My father married one of my best friends. She was just 2 years older than me, exactly. We were both October girls, but when I turned 13, she turned 15. And my father married her like a week or so after her 15th birthday. That was so weird to me, and it would just put a whole new spin on my relationship with her. But to this day, I find a hard time just trying to even comprehend how that was allowed, a 15-year-old, especially now that I have children of my own, and looking at how young, and I mean, that to me was just like almost, it was pedophilia when I think back about it. You don't marry someone that's underage. I feel that, especially later, within just a few years after that, a couple of years, my dad married my second best friend, my BFF, since I was 6 years old, and she was 19. But I was very close to her, and I had seen her go through at least a couple of boyfriends that she was madly in love with, and they were young, and they didn't hold the priesthood like that she was told that my father did, and she was very much coerced into marrying my father more out of guilt and sense of duty than any kind of love. She did end up having 6 children with my father. Today I'm still friends with her, still friends with his first wife, the 15-year-old. She went on to have 5 children before she got the strength to leave my father. But I was very disillusioned in the fact that the wives kept getting younger. There was never a limit to any amount of wives that they could get. With each wife came more poverty, less nights for my dear deprived mother, who was already lonely and hurting and depressed, and it just put a whole new spin. I just thought there was no limit. Struggled for years with a lot of fear and guilt because of what I had been taught, and for years I felt like, wow, I had to question myself, am I really going to go to hell? But then I would think back to all the requirements that were required of me, and I would think of my beautiful mom and all of my dad's other wives and what they were going through and their unfulfillment, and it would just make me think, yeah, if I have to live in hell to get to heaven, I don't even want that kind of heaven.
Mm-hmm. And when my baby was born, she wasn't very old, when I felt like I had reached a point where I could not live with him anymore. It was just too difficult. When my baby would cry, he'd throw water in her face until she quit crying, and I was afraid he was going to drown her. Yeah. And he said, that's the way the babies have to be. You do not have these large families and all these obedient children by accident. These children never cry in a meeting. They never cry. Anybody can tell you these children in polygamy are totally obedient, and this is how they start. Yeah. So he said, if you interfere, I'll keep throwing water in her face. And this was his M.O., how he handled things. If he wanted to make me sad, it was threaten the baby.
And we had talked about this water torture on babies in a couple of shows in the past.
Right.
So our viewers would be aware of this. It was a standard procedure.
It was a standard procedure.
In different groups.
It was.
Yeah, I grew up in a large family and left home at a very young age. I think it's because we just had a lot of problems. I have about 25 sisters and 9 brothers, and I'm the oldest of 10 boys. My father was a narcissist and an alcoholic, and that's another thing that happens in polygamous families is there's a lot of alcoholism on the men's side, and I think it's because of the obligations that they've got or supposedly they have. In my case, I very rarely ever saw my father.
How did he handle his obligations as a father?
Well, he didn't. He very, very rarely came around. He didn't supply any sort of support. My mother was left with 6 children. She was trying to support these 6 children. It was a very poor situation. Well, he had 4 wives at that time. And we didn't live in the same structure. We rented in our case. My mother was very subservient. She never ever dared say anything to him pro or con because of her belief. That's one reason why I left. I left home about 3 or 4 days before I turned 14 years old. And I left because that made one less for her to have to feed, and I wasn't old enough to have a job at that particular time to be able to help the family in any way. My outlook on the whole thing was pretty bad right from the get-go. I had many times heard my mother cry at night because she didn't have the food to feed her children. It was just, to me, it was a nightmare.
Were all of your father's wives that poor?
No, unfortunately, there's always a favorite wife. It can be the person who has the more forceful personality. And that was the way it was in our family.
Did he ever do anything with you as a father?
No. No, I never went to a ball game. I never went to a show with him. I never went anywhere with him. He was like non-existent. I'd never known him to ever go to any school functions or even be interested in what you were doing in that line. But any time that I was out of line, he would take it out on her. You know, it would be her fault that I was seen downtown in Salt Lake City. You know, this type of thing.
On your mother, that is. He would take it out on your mother.
Yes, but he was pretty tough on me too. I had a razor strap used on me many times. And how that worked out is my mother, if I did something my mother wasn't pleased with, she'd say, well, I'll have your father take care of that when he comes. And she would tell him that I had a spanking or whatever coming, and he would take off his belt or whatever. I know one time he was drinking and he used a 2x4 on me, and his best friend pulled him off of me and said, you're going to kill that boy. And but I never forgot that.
Wow. How old were you then?
Well, that went all the way on, all the time that I was a child this went on. 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, 11, 12, so on. All those beatings took place at that time. But he would use his belt or a razor strap, you know, was a big thing in those days because all men had a razor strap, and that would be something that would be close at hand.
In between the meetings, did he treat you with positive affirmation and any kind of emotional support in between?
No, never. Never. No. The only time that I was involved in anything is if I was in trouble for something.
How did you survive as a kid when you left home?
Well, I lived on the street. Usually I had many friends when I was young, and believe me, I was invited to their place for a sandwich or whatever, and I have to admit that I steal money out of gumball machines and things like that. I became pretty good at it running the streets. In the wintertime, I slept on top of the Woolworth store because there was a big air unit that came out of there. It was warm. I'd have to take a fire escape to get up there, and nobody bothered me because nobody could see me. Then in the summertime, I slept a lot on schoolyards, you know, on the lawn part or behind the struts and things like that. It was pretty tough to go.
Well, I've seen over and over where children had to go out and work to help support their fathers' families. My own sons went out and worked until they were like 15 years old and gave all their money to their father so that he could marry more and younger wives. Many polygamous families that I have seen, and I've had the kids come back and talk to me years later, said how they resented their fathers making them work and putting the responsibility on them and the guilt trip that they would put on them. And then these very people that worked to serve their father and help him get ahead were the very ones that were kicked out and put out so that they couldn't get wives. And in fact, they'd say that you needed to go to the outside world to get your wife. You couldn't have one in the cult because they belonged to the brethren. So these young boys that didn't know how to cope on the outside anyway were told to go find them wives and convert them and bring them back into the cult.
It's my honor today to present a great author. She wrote God's Brothel. Her name is Andrea Moore Emmett. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you.
Give us a little rundown on your book.
My book, God's Brothel, and was the first book that actually talked about the trafficking of girls, the slavery of women, the discarding of young boys in polygamy. Mormon fundamentalist and Christian fundamentalist polygamy throughout the United States and into Canada and Mexico. There's women representing about, I think, 13 different cults, polygamous cults, in my book, including some of the independent families. There were women from Christian groups as well as from the polygamous Mormon fundamentalist groups. And I think that the model that we're looking at for a polygamous relationship has absolutely nothing to do with the domestic violence model that we're used to seeing. You have to rewrite all the rules when you're talking about polygamy. I think what we're looking at with the polygamous model is a master-slave model, because these women have to start over to be actualized human beings. One particular woman in my book, Laura Chapman, who said, imagine taking a child from a third world country, picking them up and setting them down in New York City and saying, here, go live your life. That kind of tells you how completely lost they are in the rest of the world. But it goes further with the slavery model in that these women have never been able to make any choices, never been able to self-actualize. They have lost so much, including as they were growing up, because they weren't allowed to grow up. They have never gone through the typical life stages as, you know, normal children have to go through, as all children have to go through, as all human beings have to go through. The stage of being an adolescent and a young person, and I mean, even childhood is gone in polygamy. There's no childhood. So they haven't had these stages of life, and they're very socially and life stage retarded in a way. And they're kept human beings. They're meant to be worker bees, and they have no freedom. They have no freedom for even to think. So that is basically where you start with a slave that's just been shackled in every kind of way. Blind obedience in every single way. The idea of having choices is non-existent, really. I mean, they are told in a religious kind of context that they have free agency, that God has given them free agency to make choices. But they don't actually have choices, and there's a constant fear and shaming that goes on. The fear that they will have eternal damnation, and the shame that if they have any kind of even thought that leads them in another direction, that's allowing the evil into their life. Including you can't even have a frowny face. You have to constantly be sweet and show that you're so happy and say that you're so happy. And if you're not happy, it's something wrong with you, not with your environment. So it's this reality that doesn't exist that they have to pretend exists. The idea of even having a choice, like for instance, a woman in my book who said that after being out for years, and someone at work asked her, let's go get ice cream, what's your favorite ice cream? And she didn't even know. She had no idea, because she said, I was always told what I would like and what I wouldn't like. So just simple things. Imagine if you can't even think for yourself on the simplest of things, what it would be like to try to make a choice or a decision or think for yourself on something that was affecting your life. And of course, they can't make a choice on what's affecting their life, because they're told by the prophet, this is who you're going to marry, these are the kids you're going to have, which they do. They all have to have children. You can't have this, you can't do that, you have to live here, you have to do this. They do not know what choices and how to even think for themselves. So making any kind of decision is next to impossible. But then again, you know, it's your eternal damnation. They are property. Women and children are property, and men are gods on earth. Responsibility falls on women to be happy, to make sure that they obediently and blindly follow the Lord and Master, the prophet, and or the husband, who is the God of the home. And men have to have a certain number of wives, and usually that's around 3 wives, but it can vary depending on the whims of the prophet and the religion, the cult, particular group of followers, to 7, 12, even more. And then for the prophet, it can be infinite number of women. But women have to make sure that they do what they're told, marry as they're told, and make sure that the man accumulates his number of wives. It's up to the women to make sure that the children are obedient followers, and but not necessarily the ones that it falls on to punish, but although that does happen. The men are ruthless in their punishment. The men are the ones that get the glory for the perfect little followers, the little obedient children. But women have to make sure that everything runs smooth. Do without food if they have to. Do without all the things they need to run a household of numerous children. The children are just a herd. They're not individual. They don't really have relationships with their parents in these bigger families because there's just too many. No man can get to know around 200 children individually. And so the responsibility of the children is to obey and to be little workers and do as they're told. The women have to do as they're told. And the men, it's their responsibility to build up the kingdom and their own particular kingdom as well. And it's difficult to just generalize because it's different in some of the individual families and it's different in some of the different groups. But as a rule, that's the climate that they live in.
There are some common themes that I have seen, and part of it is that a lot of the polygamous groups will use subsidies of the government, food stamps. The women will not have, on record they'll say that they don't have a husband. They've got children from many men, truck drivers, whoever. So that these women have to demean themselves, go in and apply for welfare, food stamps, the whole thing, WIC, to get money to support these children of these nameless men, when in fact they have a husband in the polygamy group. They'll pick names out of a phone book in some groups, and tell their kids, we don't know who your dad is. Sometimes that happens. And so they start collecting money from the government. In one group, in just 1 year, it was discovered that there was something like, if I remember the numbers right, over $3 million in 1 year just to one polygamous group. I would want people to not buy into the warm and fuzzy love bombing that's going on right now about how polygamy can be lived, and people share this kind of lifestyle, and it's all just such a voyeuristic look at an alternative lifestyle. The fact of the matter is there are women and children who they're American-born citizens that do not have human rights afforded to them, including education in many cases. Not so much in independent families as it is in the groups. But in every case, there's egregious human rights violations, there's abuses going on, sexually, emotional, mental exploitation, and slavery, modern-day slavery, going on with American-born people.